Welcome into a brand new hour of CBS Sports HQ presented by Enterprise. I'm Jacqueline D'Agostino alongside Chris Hassel and Lige Douzable joining us here on set. To tag or not to tag, that was the question. Yeah. We got the answers. The deadline has passed. And before we get into some of the big names in free agency that are still out there, any surprises for you, Lige, when it came to the franchise tag?
I think Kyle Duggar getting the transition tag last minute was a little bit surprising. Somebody that didn't get the transition tag, Xavier McKinney. A little bit surprised the Giants didn't do that because he's only 24 years old.
All right, they didn't tag Saquon. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show, but we still have some big names when it comes to free agency that are out there. And our Pete Prisco, always working hard. He put together what
is he? Is he always working hard?
I was going to say, I was being sarcastic, Chris. I was talking about his top five, his mock draft that only went the 5 picks. But anyways, I digress. He did put together a top 10 list when it came to his free agents. Kirk Cousins, the top of the list there. Chris Jones, number 2. Danielle Hunter. Christian Wilkins. I've been seeing a lot of split videos resurface now that he is on these free agent lists.
Man's an athlete.
Yeah. Baker Mayfield rounding out the top 5. Back here on HQ, we have Danny Kanell joining us to talk about these top names you just saw there. According to Pete Prisco, so he has Kirk Cousins at the top, followed by Chris Jones. Want to talk about them 1 and 2. For Chris Jones, there is a sense that he's going to stay in Kansas City. And for Kirk, there's been rumors for Atlanta. Danny, I'll start with you. What makes the most sense for both of these guys, starting with Chris Jones?
Chris Jones, I think it's returning. Like, why wouldn't you try to come back and be one of the best dynasties in the history of the sport? No team has ever gone back to back to back, a three-peat for Super Bowl titles, and you got a chance to have a legacy that would make you a surefire first ballot Hall of Famer, and you got to play with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and this squad that is one of the best we've ever seen. So I think that makes the most sense for him, but everybody wants to get paid what they're worth, and that's why I think he's stoking the fire. There's some rumblings out there about the Raiders, but ultimately I do think he ends up back with the Chiefs. I think it's the best fit for him. I think it's the best chance to extend his career, to have a lot of success, and make his best case for a legacy of one of the best defensive tackles of all time.
DK, it's all about the Benjamins, baby, and that's why there's rumors that he could potentially go to the Las Vegas Raiders. Just imagine Mad Max Crosby and Chris Jones on the same defensive line. Now, I hear what you're talking about with legacy and all that, but let's not forget, he's already got 2 rings. Why not try to maximize what you can get in free agency? Because guys like Chris Jones usually don't hit the open market, so this is one of the few times where the best defensive tackle in all of football gets to hit the market. And just letting you know what Chris Jones means to the Kansas City Chiefs. Look at other players around him, right? A lot of the things that he does isn't added in the stat sheet. Yes, he was second in the league in sacks last year with 10.5, even though he missed the opening week in all of training camp. But look at George Karlaftis, right? Career year, 10.5 sacks. Mike Dana on the other side, coming off the edge, 6.5 sacks, another career year, because Chris Jones is that good that teams have to double team him every single play. So if you're Chris Jones, yes, it makes a lot of sense to build that continuity in Kansas City and go for the three-peat, but you also want to maximize your value and get the most bang for your buck. And the only way you can do that is to test the waters in free agency.
And what about Kirk Cousins? Because, of course, we're talking, you know, Justin Fields maybe in Atlanta. Now it's Kirk maybe in Atlanta. How do you like that fit with the Falcons and all those pieces they have on offense, and then you insert Kirk Cousins?
Well, Jacqueline, I like that fit a lot, but if you're the Minnesota Vikings, it is imperative that you do not let Kirk Cousins walk out the door. We saw what life was like without Kirk Cousins in that building, right? Kirk Cousins is one of 5 quarterbacks in NFL history, Jacqueline, to have 25-plus passing touchdowns in 8 seasons. And he was on his way to year number 9, if not for the Achilles injury. Because people forget, Justin Jefferson was hurt for a good portion in the beginning of the year with a hamstring, and yet Kirk Cousins kept him afloat. I go back to that San Francisco game where he threw for almost 400 yards and completed over 77% of his passes and upset the San Francisco 49ers at home. But going back to the Atlanta Falcons makes a lot of sense, right? Let's not forget Raheem Morris is now the head coach, but he brought over Zach Robinson, who comes from that Sean McVay tree. So Kirk Cousins fits perfectly in that tree in regards to processing quick, knowing where to go with the football. When the back foot hits, you got to let it go. And you talked about some of the weapons he has. Bijan Robinson, Drake London on the outside. Maybe they can get the best finally out of Kyle Pitts. It would make a lot of sense for Kirk Cousins to leave and go to the Atlanta Falcons. But if you're the Minnesota Vikings, there's no way you let this guy walk out your building.
I agree with you, Lige, but I don't know 100% if that's what the Vikings are thinking, especially their fan base, which I would have thought would have rolled out the red carpet for Kirk Cousins. But I think they're tired of the narrative. Oh, he can't win the big game for him, even though I think that has a lot to do with some of the surroundings and some of the lack of supporting cast he's had, specifically the defense last year in the playoff run they made. But they have that 11th overall pick, and there's a lot of speculation that, could they take a quarterback in that slot? J.J. McCarthy, maybe the quarterback from Michigan, start fresh, start to build around him, pair him with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and kind of build around them for the future. So I wonder if that happens. There's also the question marks about Kirk Cousins, injury. Does he come off there, and what is he looking for in a contract? He has maximized his value more than any other player, maybe in the history of the NFL, timing it up perfectly. If the Vikings are looking for, a shorter-term deal with less guarantees, that might make the Atlanta Falcons more attractive, with Arthur Blank, the owner, saying, go do whatever it takes to get us a guy. And you mentioned some of it there. Zach Robinson, obviously the system, he wouldn't have to learn an entire new system as far as concepts and schemes. It'd be very similar to what he's been running there in Minnesota from the same, tree of offenses. But also remember, this is something I don't think anybody can truly understand unless you've been there. Happy wife, happy life. His wife is from Atlanta area. They've got gorgeous wedding pictures from there. They could go back home, if you will, for them. And that could make it a more attractive landing spot than some people think, in addition to all the talent that's there on the field around him, in a division that looks wide open right now.
Danny, let's say that Kirk Cousins does go to Atlanta and the Bucs re-sign Baker Mayfield. How do you see the Bucs and the Falcons playing out in the NFC South?
See, I know you've been paying attention, Chris, because I have said repeatedly over the last 48 hours since they did re-sign Mike Evans and got Antoine Winfield coming back, and it appears to be Baker Mayfield, that the Bucs would be the favorites to win the division. But if Kirk Cousins comes in, I think that propels Atlanta to the front of the conversation, or at least a very tight race for the preseason odds-on favorite to win that division. But I think it is that significant of an upgrade. I mean, Raheem Morris said it best. And I don't know if I'd be here if we got better quarterback play. There is talent on this roster that should make you a winner. So I would say you might give the slight edge to the Vikings to the Falcons if they sign former Vikings quarterback Kirk Cousins, bring him in there to be their starter. I think that significant upgrade would put them to the top of the division.
DK, I'm on the opposite side. Even if Kirk Cousins goes to Atlanta, I think there's something to be said for continuity. Now, the first thing we got to talk about is will the Bucs be able to re-sign Baker Mayfield, because he is truly a free agent, right? And the next thing that we have to talk about, right, we talked about continuity. Mike Evans coming back, Chris Godwin, he has a real rapport with them, but he had a big loss this offseason. Dave Canales, his offensive coordinator, goes to the Carolina Panthers. Let's not forget, Geno Smith had his best career year with Dave Canales in Seattle. Baker Mayfield had his best career year with Dave Canales as the offensive coordinator. So you have to wonder how that could potentially affect Baker Mayfield. We know he's not going to Carolina because they have Bryce Young, the #1 pick from last year, but you have to think that Baker Mayfield takes that into consideration. I think Mike Evans, when his true numbers came out on the deal, people were thinking it was around $25 million. It's more like $21 million. I think he did that so they could sign a guy like Baker Mayfield. I actually was surprised they didn't tag Baker Mayfield and try to get a deal done with Antoine Winfield, because I believe the tag for a quarterback is around $38.4 million, which is probably the range that Baker Mayfield is going to get, around that $40 million range. That way you tag him, you know he's in the building, and you can have time to work out a deal. So just the continuity with the offense with Baker Mayfield coming back to the Tampa Bay Bucs, I would give them a slight edge over the Atlanta Falcons, even if Kirk Cousins does go to Atlanta.
All right, so some dominoes to fall there for the Bucs. Also, we're wondering what's going to happen with Saquon, because he was tagged last year, not tagged this go-around, so he is going to test free agency. There's still a chance he could remain a New York Giant. And Lige, I'll start with you. Does that make the most sense, or should he go elsewhere?
It depends on where he gets the most money, honestly, and the Giants didn't tag him because of how he got tagged last year. It would have been a slight bump up, and I think it would have been around $12.1 million. Well, Saquon Barkley was not going to get that on the open market, so the Giants were like, go ahead and test the market. If a deal works out, you can come back to the New York Jets, but there's going to be some teams vying for Saquon Barkley's skill set in the free agent market. The only thing that hurts Saquon Barkley is this is one of the most deepest free agency classes we've seen team at the running back position. I mean, Josh Jacobs is out there, Austin Eckler, King Henry is out there, DeAndre Swift, and then Aaron Jones could potentially be a cap casualty and cut. He could be a free agent. So the thing is, with these running backs, they're going to be bidding against themselves, and most teams will probably feel like we can still get a quality running back and not have to overpay him. Even though the Saquon Barkley does have a special skill set in regards to being a home run threat out of the backfield and also catching the ball out of the backfield, there are so many skilled running backs, it's going to hurt Saquon Barkley and the rest of these running backs in the market.
It will. I mean, it's been the same story for several years now running, that it doesn't matter how good you are, you have to be so elite to break the bank as a running back. So I think that's already kind of set in stone. But Lige, I say he's got to get out of New York. And for one reason, he's got to be tired of seeing 8- and 9-man boxes every time, because no one has been afraid of Daniel Jones and any sort of pass game coming from that New York Giants offense. Could you imagine what he'd do at a place where either you paired him up with a Lamar Jackson? We kind of kicked around that idea last week, where you'd have a quarterback who can run in an open passing game that Todd Monken would have a field day, or a true passing quarterback like C.J. Stroud and the Houston Texans and some of the young weapons they've got around there and a good offensive line. That, to me, would add years to Saquon's career if he's able to actually see some open holes. And you might see that version of Saquon that won Rookie of the Year that is so explosive when you give him just a little bit more space and a better numbers count as far as pertains to the box. He's been facing so many loaded boxes because no one respects the quarterback. I know money has to come into play, but I think for his career longevity, it would be better for him, and you see the best version of Saquon if he went somewhere else.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that last point, DK, because that's what I was going to bring out, right? His value. If he goes to one of those other teams, say it's the Baltimore Ravens, or he goes with C.J. Stroud and the Houston Texans, his value won't be as great. So a team is not going to be willing to pay him as much, where we know he's the bell cow with the New York Giants. And then there's always that off-the-field money he can make in New York, knowing it's the media capital of the world. There's so many things he can do off the field to make money. That's why I think it makes a lot of sense for him to go back to New York. But I'm with you. If he goes to a team like the Baltimore Ravens, where he maybe isn't the focal point, or the Houston Texans, we could see maybe that rookie Saquon that we saw.
Only 2 offensive players were tagged. They were both wide receivers, Higgins of the Bengals, Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. So Calvin Ridley appears to be the #1 wide receiver on the market. Danny, he admittedly said it took him a while to learn that Jacksonville offense last season, took him a while to get going. What's a logical fit for him now that he hits the open market?
Well, I mean, there's been one team that we thought had issues all season long at depth at wide receiver and somebody who could step up, and it's the Kansas City Chiefs. And even with those problems, they were still able to win the Super Bowl. What better spot for a receiver who's coming off his second 1,000-yard receiving season? Still looks like he's got a lot left in the tank. You know, had his year suspension. He comes back. What better place to play than with Patrick Mahomes in Andy Reid's system? Think he'd be a really good fit there. The other one's interesting, another AFC team, too. One we talked about potentially for Saquon Barkley. I think he'd be an upgrade over Odell Beckham Jr. and a couple of the other receivers they've got in Baltimore. So you could stay in the same conference, potentially get revenge against the team that didn't tag you or didn't decide to keep you long term. But I think somebody's going to find a real value here in Calvin Ridley, and a quality receiver who can really stretch the field. He runs great routes. I think this is a couple good fits for him.
DK, when you're getting free agent market, sometimes you need some luck. And you talked about it, Has. He's going to be the top guy because the other 2 top guys got tagged, right? So he's probably going to get overpaid in this free agent market. Now, the thing about Calvin, really, this is what's interesting about him, right? He's not a typical guy going into his second contract. He'll be 29 years old. So he came into the league already an older rookie. So he has to weigh that in regards to, there is rumors that he wants to go back to Jacksonville, but you got to get the most out of this contract, because you might not see another big payday because you're already 29 years old. Say a team does give you a 4-year deal. You're talking about being 33 at the end of that deal. So to your point, Danny, it took him a little while to get going, and that's expected, being off of football for 2 years, and he had some concentration drops. One thing I wanted to see him do was really take off when Christian Kirk got hurt. We didn't see that with some inconsistencies there, as I talked about the concentration drops. But I think teams feel with another year being removed from the 2-year suspension, or not 2-year suspension, 1-year suspension, that he'll be back to his old self, and he will have a bevy of teams looking for his services this offseason. He's going to be the #1 guy, and he most likely gets overpaid.
All right, Christian Kirk, one of those guys a few years ago that kind of benefited from that. Lige Douzable and Danny Kanell with us here, 24 hours removed or thereabouts from the tag deadline and free agency coming next week. Lige was on the very latest Pick 6 podcast a little bit earlier yesterday. Will Brinson. What'd you guys talk about?
Tag, you're it. The tag deadline, obviously. And then the Russell Wilson trade. Was it the worst trade in NFL history?
Pete thinks so. JJ thinks so.
I do too.
Check out the latest Pick 6 pod.